Abigail Vale stood in front of the big mirror in her living room, helping her granddaughter Clara adjust the lace veil. The soft afternoon light came through the curtains, touching Clara's face and making her look almost angelic. Abigail's heart warmed as she looked at her. The same green eyes her son Thomas had, the same smile her late husband Edward once had too. "Grandma," Clara said, twirling slightly, "do you think Grandpa would have liked this dress?" Abigail smiled faintly. "He would have adored it, sweetheart. You look beautiful." For a moment, everything felt peaceful. The kind of peace Abigail had waited years to feel. After losing her husband when she was still young, she had poured her heart into raising her son. And now, seeing her granddaughter preparing for marriage, it felt like life had come full circle. Then Clara reached into a small velvet box. "I almost forgot. Look at this ring, Grandma. Daniel and I found it at a little antique shop downtown. Isn't it lovely?" Abigail turned to look, and her heart stopped. It was a simple gold band, polished but aged, shining softly under the light. But it wasn't the ring itself that froze her blood. It was the small engraving inside. The letters were faint, but she could still read them. E+E. Her hands trembled. She blinked, hoping her eyes were deceiving her. But no, those were Edward's initials. She'd seen his handwriting 1,000 times, on letters, notes, and the small cards he used to leave beside her morning tea. The same curve of the E. The same steady hand. "Where did you say you found it?" she asked quietly. Clara smiled, unaware of her grandmother's growing panic. "Oh, just a little shop near the park. The owner said it came from an old estate sale. I felt something when I saw it, like it was meant to be mine." Daniel said the same thing. She laughed softly, admiring the ring on her finger. "It's vintage, just like I wanted." Abigail's throat tightened. She wanted to smile back, but her lips wouldn't move. Her mind had already gone somewhere far away, to a rainy day in 1973, the last time she'd seen Edward alive. He had left for a short business trip, kissed her cheek, and promised to be back in 2 days. That night, she got a call saying his car had gone off a bridge. They never found the body. For years, she'd kept his memory alive through stories, photographs, and the wedding ring he'd given her, a plain gold band with no engraving. But this one, with E+E, wasn't hers. And yet, she knew it belonged to him. Her heartbeat quickened. The room felt smaller, colder. Clara noticed the silence. "Grandma? Are you okay?" Abigail forced a smile. "Yes, darling, I'm fine. It's just a beautiful ring." But inside, her thoughts were spinning. Why did he have another ring with different initials? Who was the other, E? And how could this ring, after all these years, end up on her granddaughter's hand? Clara went back to the mirror, humming a soft tune as she adjusted her hair. She was glowing, full of life, love, and dreams. Abigail didn't want to ruin that. She stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine. But her fingers itched to touch the ring again, to look closer, to make sure it wasn't some cruel coincidence. As Clara left to meet her fiancé for dinner, Abigail sat alone in the quiet room. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than usual. She picked up the small velvet box where Clara had kept the ring before putting it on. Her fingers brushed the soft fabric, and she felt something cold inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in decades. The past, the one she had buried deep, was knocking again. That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edward's face, his gentle smile, his promise that he would always come back. And then the letters inside the ring flashed in her mind. E+E. At 2 a.m., she got out of bed and went to her dresser. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a faded box tied with a ribbon. Inside were the few photos she still kept of Edward. Their wedding picture. A vacation at the seaside. Him holding Thomas as a baby. All of it felt warm, until her eyes caught something else. A photograph she didn't remember putting there. It was old and slightly torn. Edward stood beside a woman she didn't know. She was beautiful, dark hair, bright smile, wearing a summer dress. And on her finger, the same ring. Abigail's heart pounded. She flipped the photo over, her hands trembling. On the back, in Edward's handwriting, were the words, "Edward and Evelyn, summer 1970. Her chest tightened. She could barely breathe. Evelyn. Another E. Her mind flooded with questions. Who was Evelyn? Why had Edward never mentioned her? And how did this picture end up hidden in her drawer? One she never opened anymore. The clock struck 3. The night outside was silent, but inside, her world had just begun to crumble. She looked at the photo again, tears welling in her eyes. The man she had loved, the one she had mourned for 50 years, had secrets buried deeper than his grave. Abigail placed the photo back in the box, closed it slowly, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll find the truth." As the first light of morning touched her window, she knew one thing for certain. This ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to the past she thought was gone forever. And she wasn't ready for what it was about to unlock. The morning sun slipped through the curtains, painting soft lines across Abigail's face as she sat at the edge of her bed, the photograph still in her trembling hands. She hadn't slept a minute. Every sound of the house, the ticking clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, seemed louder in the quiet. Her heart felt heavy, her mind full of questions that wouldn't stop spinning. She kept staring at the name written on the back of the photograph. Edward and Evelyn, summer 1970. The writing was unmistakable. Edward's handwriting was something she could never forget, even after all these years. She had memorized every curve of his letters, the little flourish at the end of his E. There was no mistake. He had written it. But who was Evelyn? Abigail rubbed her forehead, feeling the ache of old memories pressing against her. She tried to remember if Edward had ever mentioned that name, but nothing came. It was as if Evelyn had never existed, until now. The photograph looked too real to be a coincidence. Edward's arm was around the woman, their faces close, both smiling like people in love. The summer sunlight in the photo made it look like a happy memory, but to Abigail, it felt like a knife. When the clock struck 8, she went to the kitchen and made herself tea. Her hands were shaking too much to hold the cup steady. She stared out the window, watching the world outside move like nothing had changed, people walking, birds flying. But inside her, everything had. After a while, she called her son Thomas. "Morning, Mum," he said cheerfully. Abigail tried to keep her voice steady. "Thomas, do you remember where you put that box of your father's old things? The one from the attic?" Yes, it's still up there, I think." "Why?" "I just want to look through it again," she said quietly. "Sure, Mum." "You okay?" "Yes, dear. Just feeling a bit nostalgic," she lied. After hanging up, she climbed the creaky attic stairs. Dust filled the air, thick and dry, like a place time had forgotten. She found the old box near the corner, covered in a thin gray layer. Inside were a few of Edward's belongings, a wristwatch, a tie, an old lighter, and some papers. But nothing explained the photo. Nothing mentioned Evelyn. Abigail sat down on a wooden trunk, staring at the box. The memories came rushing back. The day Edward left for that last business trip. His smile, his kiss, his promise to call her when he arrived. She had waited days for that call. Then came the police visit, the accident report, the condolences. Everyone had told her he was gone, that she had to move on. She had believed them. Now, that belief was cracking like glass. Her eyes went back to the ring on Clara's hand in her memory. E+E. If it truly belonged to Edward and Evelyn, how had it ended up in an antique shop decades later? Where had it been all this time? She closed the box, took a deep breath, and decided she needed answers. She would go to that shop. Maybe the owner knew where the ring came from. Later that afternoon, Abigail took a bus to the old part of town. The street was lined with little stores, bookshops, cafes, and one with a faded wooden sign that read Windsor Antiques. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. The shop smelled like old wood and dust, with shelves full of forgotten treasures. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, wearing glasses and a warm smile. "Good afternoon," he greeted. "Looking for anything special?" Abigail hesitated. "Actually, my granddaughter bought a ring here recently. A gold band with an engraving inside, E+E. The man nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, yes, I remember that one. Beautiful piece. I almost kept it for myself, but a young couple bought it." "Your granddaughter, you say?" "Yes," Abigail said quietly. "Do you know where it came from?" The man walked to a small desk and opened a record book. He flipped through a few pages before stopping. "Let me see. Yes, here it is. It came from an estate sale about 3 months ago. The name was Evelyn Monroe. She lived just outside town. Passed away recently." Abigail's chest tightened. "Evelyn Monroe?" "Yes," the man said, not noticing her shock. "Lovely woman, from what I heard. She lived alone for years. No children, no family left. The items were sold off by the estate agent." Evelyn Monroe. The name from the photograph. Abigail thanked the man and left the shop in silence. Her hands were cold, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed in her ears. Evelyn had been real. She wasn't just some name in a photo. She was a woman who had lived in the same town for decades, while Abigail had spent those same years mourning a husband who might not have been dead at all. The bus ride home felt endless. Abigail stared out the window, the world blurring past her. She tried to tell herself there was some explanation, something innocent. But deep down she knew. The pieces were fitting together too neatly to be a coincidence. When she reached home, she sat by the window and held the photograph again. This time she looked closer. Edward's eyes in the picture, they weren't just smiling. They looked content, peaceful, like a man who had found something he wanted. Tears welled in her eyes. For years, she had built a life on the belief that Edward loved her, that their story ended too soon. But maybe it hadn't ended. It had simply continued somewhere else, with someone else. As the day faded into evening, Abigail whispered to herself, "You lied to me, Edward." Her voice cracked. "You didn't die. You just left." Her heart felt heavy, but strangely determined. The truth had begun to show itself, and she knew she couldn't stop now. She needed to know how far the lie went. She picked up her coat, took one last look at the photo, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll find your Evelyn, Edward. And I'll find out what you really did." The wind outside rustled softly through the trees, almost as if it were carrying her words away. Abigail didn't know what she would find next, but she knew one thing for sure. The truth had already started to unravel, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Abigail woke up with a single thought in her mind: Evelyn Monroe. She said the name quietly to herself as she made tea. It sounded like a whisper from another life, a name that had somehow lived in the shadows of her marriage. The shopkeeper's words kept echoing in her head. Evelyn had died only a few months ago. She had lived nearby. Alone. Abigail couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Evelyn still had something that could tell her the truth? Letters, photographs, anything. She found the estate agent's number on the back of the receipt the shopkeeper had given her. Her hand trembled as she dialed. A woman answered, polite but formal. "Good morning, Alder Estate Services. How can I help?" "Hello," Abigail began softly. "I'm calling about the estate of a woman named Evelyn Monroe. I believe she lived outside of town. I was wondering if there were any unsold items left from her home." "One moment, ma'am," the woman said. Papers rustled on the other end. "Yes, there are a few boxes still being processed." "Are you a relative?" Abigail hesitated. "No, just someone who knew her. I think we might have had a connection." There was silence, then the woman replied, "We still have a few personal belongings in storage. If you'd like to view them, you can come by this afternoon." Abigail thanked her and hung up. Her chest felt tight, but her decision was made. She was going. The estate building sat at the edge of town, quiet and cold. When Abigail arrived, the clerk led her to a back room filled with boxes labeled E. Monroe. Dust covered the tops, but one small wooden chest caught her eye. "You can take a look," the woman said kindly. "We haven't cataloged everything yet. If you find something personal, let me know." Abigail nodded and slowly opened the chest. Inside, she found neatly folded scarves, a few framed photographs, and a small tin box tied with ribbon. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Each one began the same way: "My dearest Evelyn." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Edward's. She picked up one of the letters, dated April 1973, the same month he had supposedly died. Her breath caught as she began to read. "My dearest Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone from the life everyone knows me by. It's the only way we can be together. I can't live in two worlds anymore, one with her and one with you. I've made my choice. Please don't be afraid. We'll start fresh, somewhere quiet, where no one knows our names. Forever yours, Edward." Abigail's vision blurred with tears. Her hand pressed against her chest. She could barely breathe. He hadn't died in an accident. He had left her. He had left them. Her fingers moved through the rest of the letters. There were more: birthday notes, small love letters, even one with a pressed flower inside. All written in that same familiar hand. Each one proof that while she had been mourning, he had been living a new life with Evelyn. Then she found something else, a small envelope tucked underneath the letters. It was addressed to E. Monroe, for safekeeping. Inside was a folded document, a birth certificate. Her heart pounded as she read the names. Name of child, Samuel Monroe. Date of birth, November 1970. Father's name, Edward Vale. She covered her mouth to stop a cry. Her body shook. The truth was no longer a shadow. It was written right there in front of her. Edward hadn't just loved another woman. He had a son with her. Abigail sat there for a long time, the papers trembling in her hands. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down on her. After a while, the clerk gently knocked. "Ma'am? Are you all right?" Abigail wiped her tears quickly. "Yes," she whispered. "I just found something I didn't expect." She placed the letters and the birth certificate back into the box. "Can I keep these?" The woman hesitated but nodded. "Since no one has claimed the estate, I don't see why not." Abigail thanked her softly and left. The drive home felt unreal. The wind outside whipped through the trees, but she barely noticed. She was somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief. The man she had mourned for 50 years had chosen another life, another family, while she had spent hers clinging to a lie. At a red light, she whispered his name. "Edward, why?" There was no answer, just the hum of the car engine and the ache in her chest. When she got home, she spread the letters on her kitchen table. Her tears fell on the paper as she read the words again and again. The man who had once held her hand and promised her forever had written the same words to someone else. And yet, even through her pain, part of her wanted to understand. What kind of man fakes his death? What could drive him to leave so completely? She stayed up late that night, reading every letter, piecing together their story. It was all there, their plans, their secret meetings, their dream of a quiet life by the sea. He had left everything behind, including her, to start over with Evelyn. When the last page fell from her hand, Abigail sat back, exhausted and hollow. The clock ticked in the quiet room, marking each second of her new reality. Edward hadn't died. He had simply chosen a different truth. Abigail looked at the box of letters, her eyes red but steady now. "You took my life and gave it to someone else," she whispered. "But you didn't take my strength." Outside, the night wind brushed against the windows. The world kept turning, even with her heart in pieces. But deep inside her, something had changed. She wasn't just the woman he had left behind. She was the one who finally knew. Tomorrow, she decided she would tell Thomas. He deserved to know the truth about his father. And after that, she would decide what to do with the truth. Whether to let it destroy what was left of her family, or to finally set them free. The next morning came with a quiet stillness. Abigail sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letters spread before her. The sunlight touched the paper softly, as if afraid to disturb the pain written on them. She hadn't slept again, but she didn't feel tired. She just felt empty. All night, she had thought about what to do. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edward's handwriting. His words. His betrayal. The man she once believed had died tragically had instead chosen to vanish, leaving her to live a lie for 50 years. But now, she wasn't angry anymore. Not the same way she had been the night before. The sadness had turned into something quieter, heavier, acceptance. The truth had already broken her heart, but it had also opened her eyes. She looked at one of the last letters again. In it, Edward had written, "If I could take away your pain, I would. But some things are meant to stay buried, my love. Please forgive me." Abigail let out a shaky breath. "You don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "But I think I'll forgive you anyway." Because carrying his ghost had already taken enough of her life. Later that day, she called her son Thomas. "Can you come by this evening?" she asked. "There's something we need to talk about." "Of course, Mum. Is everything okay?" "Yes," she said softly. "I just need to show you something." The hours passed slowly. Abigail cleaned the kitchen, made tea, even set out biscuits, small, nervous habits. She wasn't sure how Thomas would react. He had spent his whole life believing his father was a good man, a loving husband who'd been taken too soon. How could she tell him that his father had faked his death and started another family? When Thomas finally arrived, he kissed her cheek. "You sound serious, Mum. What's going on?" Abigail didn't answer right away. She motioned for him to sit. Then she opened the small wooden box and pushed it gently toward him. "Read," she said simply. He picked up the first letter. His brow furrowed as he read. He turned to the next and the next. The room was silent except for the sound of paper rustling and the ticking of the clock on the wall. After a few minutes, Thomas stopped reading. His face had gone pale. "Mum," he said, his voice breaking. "Are you telling me Dad didn't die?" Abigail nodded slowly. "He didn't die, Thomas. He left. He was living with another woman. Her name was Evelyn Monroe." Thomas's hands clenched around the letters. "No, that can't be right. There has to be a mistake. Dad wouldn't." "There's no mistake," Abigail interrupted softly. "I've seen it with my own eyes. The letters. The ring. The birth certificate. He had another child, Thomas. A son. His name was Samuel Monroe. Thomas looked away, his jaw tight. His eyes filled with tears. All these years, he whispered. All those stories about him. How proud I was to be his son. It was all a lie. Abigail reached out, touching his hand. No, sweetheart. Your life wasn't a lie. His choices were. For a while, neither of them spoke. The truth hung between them, sharp, painful, but undeniable. Finally, Thomas said, "Does Clara know?" Abigail shook her head. "No. And I don't think she needs to. That ring she wears, she found it by chance. It doesn't belong to her story, Thomas. It belongs to mine." He nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. "So what do we do now?" Abigail looked out the window, her voice calm. "We live. We move on. The truth doesn't need to destroy us. It just needs to free us." A week later, the wedding day arrived. The morning was full of laughter and flowers. Clara was glowing in her white dress, her eyes bright with excitement. When she came to show Abigail the final look, she smiled and said, "Do I look okay, Grandma?" Abigail smiled gently. "You look perfect, my love." Her gaze drifted to the gold ring on Clara's hand. For a second, the past flickered, the letters, the lies, the pain. But instead of sorrow, she felt peace. That ring no longer represented betrayal. It represented survival. Proof that even from broken stories, new ones could bloom. When Clara walked down the aisle, Abigail held Thomas's arm. The music played softly. Everyone smiled. But inside Abigail's heart, something was shifting. The truth had hurt her deeply, but now it was giving her something she hadn't felt in years, freedom. Later that night, after the wedding, Abigail sat alone on the balcony of her house. The stars were bright, the air cool. She opened a new notebook and began to write. It wasn't a letter to Edward this time. It was a letter to his other son. "Dear Samuel, you don't know me, but we share something in common, the same father. I don't know what kind of man he was to you, but I hope he gave you what he couldn't give me. Peace. I am not writing out of anger. I just want you to know that you existed, and now I know too. You don't have to be ashamed of where you came from. None of us do. Abigail Vale." When she finished, she folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. She didn't know if she would ever send it, but writing it made her feel lighter. She looked up at the night sky and smiled sadly. "You can rest now, Edward," she whispered, "because I finally can too." The next morning, she watched Clara and her new husband drive away for their honeymoon. As the car disappeared down the road, Abigail felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from pain, but from relief. She had carried a secret without knowing it for most of her life. Now that secret had been revealed, and though it changed everything, it also gave her back her peace. For the first time in 50 years, the weight on her heart was gone. She looked down at the ring still shining on Clara's hand as the car turned the corner. And with a quiet, knowing smile, Abigail whispered to herself, "The truth broke my heart, but it set me free."